Recently, we had the pleasure of being able to do an interview with the American band Iris. Their style represents a mixture of rock, synth-pop, and electronica all in one, and can't really be put into one genre. The band currently consists of singer-songwriter Reagan Jones and keyboardist-programmer Andrew Sega. Their latest album, Blacklight, was released just this past September. The band's beginning can be traced to a music lab class at a small university in Texas. Reagan briefly explained how the band was formed.
Anyway, long story short, I just met a guy, his name is Mark Schultz. He lived in the same apartment I did, and we got together and started playing open mic nights. Then we met Matt Morris, kind of ran one of the big labs. Kind of funny, you could actually take the course over and over. I think to boost your GPA, because you always got an A. Matt taught that class, and we just developed into a small band out of that.
Andrew came into the picture later.
Matt had left the band, and I don't know, it's like the hooks were in me at that point. Like, I couldn't stop. It just was something I had to do. After like a succession of different people I met trying to make this work and that work, Matt actually was the one that told me about Andrew, so I listened to a few things. It's funny because I was in the studio with a guy, a real accomplished production guy. Like this is the kind of guy that comes out of Los Angeles, you know, big studio, pedigreed engineer. I was in the studio, actually. We were working on, I think, the song Island from Awakening. I heard, I think, Last Collection and Winter from I can't remember the name of the record, but it's one of two of Andrew's tracks, and I was like, wow, that's very, very interesting, you know. It kind of like just, I mean, I hated to do it. I feel like a jerk even today, but that was it, you know. It was like, see, I gotta go.
Was Unknown, by any chance, one of the first songs that you two worked on, or?
I think it was, actually. It was a long time ago. I mean, if it wasn't the first, it was certainly one of the first. I mean, because basically, if my memory serves me right, Reagan just rolled over with a whole bunch of demos. Unknown was certainly one of them. And I do sort of think that was probably one of the first tracks at least one of the first tracks we started. I mean, a lot of these tracks are done, the Awakening tracks are done at the same time. But Unknown was certainly one of the very first we ever tried.
When you collaborate, is it in person, or do you do stuff with the internet now? Like one person records one thing and sends it to the other, or?
Oh yeah, it's always been internet, basically. I mean, we've never actually lived in the same town, believe it or not. When I was in Austin, he was in Dallas, and then I was in Chicago, he was in Austin, et cetera, et cetera. But since it's always been sort of like Reagan does the demo, sends it to me, and then I basically do the production, it doesn't actually involve, I mean, then he'll comment on it, but it doesn't involve a lot of file back and forth. At least, you know, it's perfectly reasonable. So we've never really had problems just doing stuff virtually, and occasionally get together to, you know, jam out or record a vocal or something, but generally it all happens online.
So is the mixing typically done on your end with your own equipment, or do you ever go into a specialized studio?
Oh, hell no. I mean, even in the case of the most recent one where we had a friend of mine do some mixing work, I mean, it was all basically done at home-level studios. We've never really rolled into like a big, you know, with a big 48-track board and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that you know, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It's just, you know, we've typically done our stuff on a smaller scale.
It's, I don't know, it's kind of just part of who we are, really. I don't think we would feel, you know, super comfortable really even going into like a huge studio. It just would seem, I don't know, the word pretentious comes to mind. That's not the right one, but just, we kind of like it the way it is, you know, just, we're sort of proud of that fact, you know.
And honestly, there's nothing these days that you can't do at home that you could, you know, the studio is not giving you anything extra. I mean, if you have good monitors, you know, and you have a decent audio device, and you know, sort of know what you're doing, I mean, you can make some great sounding stuff at home. I mean, unless you need to record drums or do some very complicated, you know, record a piano with 48 mics or something, it's like you're better off saving the money.
A common topic these days is the ever-increasing loudness of commercial CDs, using various processing methods to decrease the dynamic range. Andrew has his own short comment on this trend.
Well, I think it's really a 10-second discussion. It's like, it's stupid. Don't do it. Why do people squash so much?
Yeah, I'm scared of mastering, to be honest. I don't even like it. I mean, if I had it my way, we wouldn't master anything, because some of it's probably to do with my limited understanding of these things. I think even closer to real off this latest record, I was very concerned about, actually all the tracks. I didn't want them crushed. Sometimes the dynamic that Andrew was able to get before we ever do that is so good that, honestly, I'm kind of like, it's done. And then it's almost like mastering something that we have to do, like it's an obligatory thing that you do when you're in a band and you make an album. But this last record got me thinking more and more about, like, is it even needed,
I mean, really, the mastering is just to try to, and we try to use a very light touch on this last one, but just to try to, like, even this, it's more about evening it out as you go from song to song, so it feels like a record, not like a series of, N different tracks.
Though people often wonder what they are about, the lyrics are supposed to be clear-cut.
I really try to be very clear, in the lyrics, and it's always kind of a bummer, when I hear that they're ambiguous, because if you write lyrics with ambiguity, it's kind of like painting an abstract. There's no right or wrong to it. It's like you just see what you want into it. And I tend to be a lot more of a realist, even in art, although I do like abstract art. But I really try to carve out a very specific meaning, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Maybe today, people are kind of used to stuff that's just reach out and grab you real quick. It's kind of hard to give it a chance. I would say that for the most part, if you really just kind of study it through and focus on what's being said, it'll probably be a lot more clear. I think the more you look at it, the more it'll become evident,
I noticed in your bio, you guys had mentioned something about the song Appetite being on mainstream radio in, of all places, Poland.
It's a long story, but the short version is that our record got licensed to a Polish label who was run by a guy who works at a pretty big Media Markt, which is basically like a Best Buy, sort of. And, he doesn't normally deal in super sort of poppy tracks, but for some reason he heard that track and thought it would somehow be like, could be big in Poland. So he then somehow knew a guy at Sega Radio, which is like this big mainstream Polish radio chain that has stations in every major city in Poland. And he, I guess, pitched it to him, or who knows exactly what with them. But, he's like, hey, I'm going to try something. And next thing I know, like, we had gotten onto a chart. And sort of like, and he was, our label guy was very surprised. And he's like, well, let's see if we can, keep this going. And sort of it went up and up and up and up and up. And then somehow, one day I get this email. It's like, you're number one in, like, Krakow or something. And it's like, you're number one in Warsaw. And I'm like, really? And it was very brief. It was only for, a couple weeks, I guess. But, there was a period of time when we were getting lots of play on, real mainstream Polish radio. And I think it's just, each country over there has their own particular tastes. And so, it's sometimes you just get lucky and make a song that appeals to a certain group of people. And I don't think we've never really seen we've seen some money, I guess, but we've never seen like a big, it's not like we've turned into a big deal over there. So this is sort of an interesting little experience.
Can you guys tell me a little bit about your New York City CD release show?
It was definitely a weird one. Show was good. I assume you're referring to the incident at the end.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. Well, so we played the Mercury Lounge, and a friend of mine had come out to see the show from San Francisco, and he had requested the song. He'd requested When I'm Not Around. And so we were like, well, we can do it at the end, sort of. We're going to do this sort of acoustic-y version. And, well, the way the Mercury Lounge is set up, there's a bar area, and there's a music room area. Mm-hmm. Not huge, only like, 340 capacity music room. And in between there's a door, and that's basically, the entire door is plate glass. And so he was outside smoking before the encore started, and then heard us start, you know, playing the song, came running through the bar, full speed, didn't see that the door was closed, and at the last minute, like, threw his arms up and crashed, like, straight through, destroying this entire glass door, glass going everywhere, blood going everywhere. And we're sitting on stage going, what just happened? And, like, the sound goes out, everyone's confused, because you couldn't really see, there's a lot of fog, you couldn't really see over there very well. And then all of a sudden the lights go out, I'm like, well, are we getting cut off for time? What's going on? And it turns out there's just, you know, huge piles of glass and blood, and it was it was a complete mess. He ended up being all right, but it was certainly a unique ending to our New York show. It was very punk rock.
Any luck with your plans for a possible U.S. tour in the spring?
We're working on it. It's just, it remains to be seen whether it'll work out as we intend it to. America's always a little tricky because America is so big that you have to very carefully plan, you know, where you'll go on each day, because otherwise you can end up with these, like, 12-hour drives, which are just death.
Yeah.
So it's sort of this treacherous game of putting cities in some order that, you know, works, and finding promoters to book the shows, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very tricky getting tours organized. So generally they take a while, so we're sort of in the process.
At the time of this interview, the tour plans for the spring of 2011 were unknown. However, in recent weeks, additional information has been announced. We look forward to hearing about the tour plans when they're finalized for the spring of 2011. We wish to thank Iris for joining us for this interview. Their latest album, Blacklight, was released in September of 2010. We will be bringing you more information about their spring tour plans and other great stuff as soon as we can. For Kutztown Radio, this is Mike B. Thicker.